Welcome back to Turn Down for What, your source for EV news and updates. Like and subscribe for more content like this episode. Let's dive on in.
Welcome back to Turn Down for What? Another day.
Another hot episode.
There we go. Well, we're back. And we missed last week. We posted some content following the EV charging summit. And so we had that. And on our YouTube channel, we did a review of the new Bright Drop EV van, which was kind of an interesting take. But today, we have the privilege of bringing on Patrick from StacheD Training. Welcome to the podcast, Patrick.
Hey, thanks for having me.
I met Patrick actually at the expo, and we got to connect. And it was just kind of in passing, but I was like, this is actually a really unique conversation. I got to look into a little bit about everything that Patrick is doing. And so just wanted to kind of take a moment to introduce Patrick with what he brings to the table, but also to then dive into our topic of the day. So to get us kicked off, Patrick is an 18-year. Patrick, why don't you introduce yourself? I'm not going to introduce you. Tell us about yourself, your experience, and what you're doing now.
Yeah, I've actually got kind of a dual path background back in 2006. So coming up on 19 years, I started as a mechanical engineer. I started in custom automation, moved to defense, and then spent the last 14 years in the automotive industry, but I was in research and development. And then in 2018, I started actually working on electric vehicles, the battery box structure for those vehicles. So I learned a lot about electric vehicles. At the same time, back in 2006, I bought my first house. I was a block away from the volunteer fire department, and I thought, you know what, I'm going to go volunteer. My wife actually talked me into it, sent me down there after talking about it like almost every day coming home from work. So I've spent almost the last 19 years now as a volunteer firefighter. I've been in a couple different areas, but right now I'm in Troy, Michigan. We've got about 150 volunteers, 6 stations, very large department, largest in Michigan. We cover a city of about 100,000 people. But what I do now is training, consulting, and safety around electric vehicles and lithium-ion batteries. And it really started by accident. I started back in really the end of 2020. I just wanted to put some slides together for my station to let them know about electric vehicles and really this new hazard that we're starting to see. And just through word of mouth, it really snowballed from there. And I was out training fire departments across Michigan. Now I'm training fire departments nationally. And I've been working for myself as a trainer and consultant for the last year. So it's been an interesting journey and really an unexpected journey.
And you also have, and we'll give it another shout out towards the end, but you also successfully launched your YouTube channel, which is looks like it's boomed since you started it. But you do a lot of different content in regards to looks like EV fires, different vehicle considerations for fire safety. Is that right?
Yeah, I do a mix of somewhere between training and independent journalism. When there's a fire or a major event involving an electric vehicle or a battery energy storage system, lithium-ion batteries in general, I dig into the details. I've got a lot of contacts now worldwide, but with different organizations, government organizations, research organizations, and I try to dig into the details, find out what really happened, talk to the firefighters or the fire department that was responding, and then get that information out to everybody. So really my goal is to let firefighters know that, hey, there's a hazard here and you've got to be prepared for this hazard, but also to tell the story in a way the general public is interested as well, and they can maybe learn something about it as well.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, I've gotten the chance. I mean, I actually didn't know about your channel at all until we met, and I looked it up, and I was actually able to watch a few videos. That's great content. A lot of shorter form content, so it's easily digestible in smaller quantities. We tend to, go on 2-hour long rampages of data, and not everybody wants to hang in for that long of data. And if you are a faithful follower and you listen to all of it, thank you so much for your dedication. But, a lot of times those quick news updates is something that people really are attracted to. And I mean, it looks like the data is very well presented, and you get a lot of interesting updates when it comes to this space, which I don't think, and we'll kind of dive into this a little bit today, there's not enough data or backing behind it to really understand the full bits of what fire safety means in an EV and how EV safety is compared to the traditional ICE vehicle. And so that's something we'll kind of dive in today. But it's obviously a very unique field that I think a lot of people, the knee-jerk response is, well, EV fires are ridiculous and crazy, but that we'll talk about a little bit today. What does that mean? Why is that the case? But then also, what is the actual statistics that are existing, and are they reliable for fire safety within EVs? But yeah, just a lot to kind of break down there. So we'll kind of start with that. Tell us a little bit about your experience getting into the EV fire safety and kind of your journey through that and what you've seen.
So it really started because I was designing that battery box structure for the electric vehicles. And what that meant was, because I was on the research side, I was benchmarking almost every electric vehicle out there and trying to understand how the battery was designed, the chemistries, but also how to contain that failure and what happens when those batteries failed. Then I started looking into the problems of what fire departments were seeing out in the field when they had an EV fire, the struggles they were having. And you heard the stories, and I'm sure you've heard the stories, 30, 40, 60,000 gallons of water and 4-6 hours on scene. And that, for a vehicle fire, that's crazy. A vehicle fire for firefighters, it's our bread and butter. It's fantastic. We love them because we get to go out, we get to have some fun, put out a fire. And it's typically from the time the tones drop, the time we leave, fight that fire, clean up, we're back in the firehouse, 30 minutes. And you're talking maybe 500 gallons of water. So it's a nice little event that we get out there, we get to practice our craft, and it's done and over with in pretty short order, and it's easy for us to manage. But the EVs, it's a whole different animal. So from there, I started getting into more understanding of what was going on, not just with EVs, but batteries in general. A lot of fires out there with lithium-ion batteries, the smaller devices, your cell phones, laptops, e-cigarettes, kids' toys, the hoverboards. But then I think it was 2021, there was a major fire event in Standish, Michigan, which is a small town of, I think, less than 1,500 people, a rural community. Their volunteer fire department, I think they had about 14 members, but they had a battery energy storage system fire up there. And learning the details about that, and then going down that road, you kind of find out that all this stuff is connected. It's just scaled from your cell phones to your micromobility, to your lawnmowers, to your plug-in hybrids, electric vehicles, all the way up to the battery energy storage systems. So it's all the same thing. It's just it's the same hazard, just at a different scale.
Yeah, when you talk about batteries, even extending beyond EVs, and you're talking about how fire departments have to respond, where I am in the Bay Area, we had a huge event about 90 minutes south of here in Moss Landing.
Yes.
Had you seen much on that? Like, is the fire community looking at an event like that? And how do you evaluate something like that? How do you learn to respond to something like that?
Unfortunately, like Moss Landing, that's a scale that that type of facility should never have been built. And if you look at today's codes and standards, it realistically shouldn't ever be built again. I've covered that in multiple videos. There's a lot going on with that one. That was a multi-day fire. The fire department, they made the right call. They stood back. They let that facility burn. And there's not a lot you can do with it. That's just, you're combining energy and batteries at that point. And it's just a scale that it's not something that you could even learn to respond to.
So on a smaller scale, when you are talking about a battery fire, there's been examples where they put it on the back of a tow and it reignites. Has that standard changed as far as, in that case of Moss Landing, they just had to stand back and kind of let it play its course. How do you decide when you're on scene? When do you stop and when do you load it onto a tow? Has the standard of that evolved from the time that it first started happening to today?
Yeah, it's a really tricky one. The standard is still to let it burn when you're talking about electric vehicles. And there's a few reasons for that. Number one, it's going to end the incident a lot faster because you're going to burn through all that energy. The other reason is you're burning through all the stranded energy and you don't have that risk of reignition later on. Because that's something we see a lot of. Maybe you do get the fire stopped, but then as soon as you move that vehicle, it reignites on a tow truck, or you get it to the salvage yard, it reignites 2 or 3 days later. So there's a real struggle with that. As far as letting it burn, though, it's a challenge because it depends on where that vehicle's at. If that vehicle is in a parking garage, for example, or somebody's regular garage at their residential house, you can't just allow that vehicle to burn in those types of structures, or if it's near some type of other thing that's flammable, we call an exposure. So what a lot of fire departments now are doing is, if you have a vehicle in a garage or in a parking garage or near anything else that's combustible, they're pulling that vehicle away and they're actually moving it while it's on fire and then allowing it to burn. But it's a very challenging situation. It's really going to be dependent on the location of that vehicle.
And to give people an idea of the size of that fire, it was, if I remember correctly, a 300 megawatt battery system that was estimated between 800 million to like $1.2 billion facility that was sitting there. So it's not like, hey, they cut corners because they could afford it. I mean, this is a huge center that is one of the largest that was available, and you had that type of fire. So it's not just a small scale. This was a massive, massive fire.
Yeah, Moss Landing was huge. And part of the reason, and I wouldn't say it was cutting corners that led to this fire, I would say it was more the unknown. This thing was designed and permitted quite a while ago, and fairly early in the life of the development of this technology.
So when they did that, it was more of everything is kind of together. Most of the battery plants I've seen nowadays have, say, a 1 megawatt Connex top scale, and all of those have setbacks between the other 1 megawatt center. Is that kind of what you see the industry going towards?
Yeah, NFPA 855, those are the standards that govern battery energy storage systems, and that really defines that, yes, you have to have smaller units. They have to be set apart. You've got to make sure if one catches on fire, it doesn't move to the next one, to the next one, to the next one, so you don't have that cascading thermal runaway effect. In Moss Landing, this was an old turbine house for a natural gas power generation facility, and it was wide open end to end in this large building, and they had racks of batteries. I believe there were 2 floors of batteries, and everything was in the open. There was no fire separation, so when you had a failure, it just ran the entire building essentially.
So
no, go ahead, Josh.
I was like, let's back up just a second, kind of like zoom out of the picture a little bit, because we kind of dove straight into the meat and potatoes, but zoom out. And if you can give your perspectives as a firefighter and as somebody who's dealt with these, what is the reason and cause and the fuel behind a gas ice fire, and the reason and cause behind why EV fires are stronger, harder to put out, just so that way chemistry wise people understand the difference between the two?
So we'll start with a combustion engine vehicle. So your ICE, internal combustion engine. Those vehicles, when they catch on fire, typically they're older vehicles, they're poorly maintained. A lot of times it's a combination. Either you have an electrical fire where something shorts out in the low voltage system. It's going to smolder for some time. It's going to take some time to become a deep-seated fire. So it's going to take time to grow inside of that vehicle until you have a very large fire. And when we respond to that, it's very easy for us to put out. The other side of it, and the reason why you typically see these vehicle fires for combustion engine vehicles and older vehicles, is your rubber fuel lines, your rubber brake lines. That rubber starts to degrade. You get a hole in a fuel line, for example, it sprays on something hot. Now I've got a fire, and it grows a little bit faster. But with that, again, they're very easy to put out. One misconception that too many people have is that gas car, internal combustion engine vehicles, they explode because of the gasoline. You know, that fire is going to get to the fuel tank. You're going to have this massive explosion, and it's bad for everybody. Gasoline just doesn't explode like that. I understand it does it in the combustion sequence, but gasoline, if you get a ruptured fuel tank, for example, that fuel is going to drop to the ground. It's going to leak across the ground. Sometimes you have fire, sometimes you don't. If you have fire, we've got tools like foam to take care of it. So again, it's not really that big of a deal. It's very manageable. On the other side, your electric vehicles, the lithium ion batteries, they go in. They like to be in a very nice, comfortable environment. So pretty much what we're sitting in right now, room temperature, that 70-degree mark. They don't like to be too hot. They don't like to be too cold. They definitely don't like mechanical damage. If they get mechanically damaged, if they get too hot, they go into thermal runaway. And thermal runaway is a chemical reaction that's exothermic. So the exothermic means that it gives off a tremendous amount of heat, but it's also self-oxidizing. So all the oxygen needed for thermal runaway is already inside of that battery. So when that chemical reaction happens in a single battery cell, like this one right here, it's going to, you're not going to stop this individual cell from going through the thermal runaway process. As a fire department or a firefighter, all you can do is stop the batteries next to it from burning cell to cell to cell by trying to cool things down. But unfortunately, when you look at like an electric vehicle, these battery cells are underneath the vehicle. They're in a box that's enclosed, and it's almost impossible for us to gain access to or get that cooling effect into that box. So it's a real struggle there. And typically the battery cells, it just rips through that entire battery box. There's different battery types as well. There's different battery chemistries as well. All that plays a role in how these vehicles burn, whether it's a slow transition through the entire box or it's a very fast transition through the entire box.
Now we had people talk about solid state batteries. With your background, have you worked in any of the new technologies for solid state or talked to anybody that's in that field to see if that could be an advantage in the future?
Yeah, I've talked to a lot of researchers, not only on solid state, but also sodium ion batteries. And my understanding in talking to the researchers, they have not solved the thermal runaway problem. The other chemistry out there that I hear a lot on is LFP, lithium iron phosphate, and that's going to solve everything, and they don't go to thermal runaway. Unfortunately, that's not accurate. LFP batteries, lithium iron phosphate, they can absolutely go into thermal runaway. It's a little bit more difficult for that to occur, but when it does occur, they release a lot more flammable gases like hydrogen, and that can be a little bit more difficult for the fire departments to deal with. And that can also lead to a vapor cloud explosion, and it makes it a lot easier for that to happen.
Hey, I've seen a number of different approaches and methods, depending on scale. On a small scale, when people have repaired batteries, small batteries like the ones that you were holding up, or things for like electric drills, those types of things, I've seen shops where they have literally like a bucket of sand, and it's they're trying to repair packs. If something were to go wrong, they drop it in a mini trash can filled with sand, and they just let it sit there for days to ensure that it's out. I've seen people talk about fire blankets, letting them burn out like you talked about, just flooding it with water like you've talked about. There was one product when I bought my Powerwall, and it I don't know if you ever seen one of these. It's almost, it harkens back to like 100 years ago, where it's almost like this grenade ball, and they had different sizes of these. And what you could do apparently was to hang it above your Powerwall, and the way it's like, as it would heat up, almost like a sprinkler system would heat and melt wax, and then it pop the sprinkler heads or whatever. This ball, when it got to a certain temperature of flame, would explode like a grenade and like suck the oxygen from around the area. And then there's things recently where I've seen tools where they puncture into a car or a battery and inject water directly. Of all of these different things that I've seen, and maybe there's some that I haven't, so add to the list, please. Are any of these effective? And not, I mean, obviously in an EV fire, the little grenade bomb wouldn't be, but a lot of people have battery storage in their garages, on the sides of their house. Mine is literally in my garage. Do those things work at all? Because a normal fire extinguisher isn't going to do much. So, like, what are you seeing that seems to be effective if you get to it early enough? What's worth the money? What isn't?
Yeah, so I haven't seen anything as of now that has provided enough data that convinces me that it's any type of chemical or water additive or anything that that, in my opinion, will work yet. Water is still the best thing. And again, water's not stopping the thermal runaway. It's just cooling everything else around it. Water does a really good job of sucking heat out of things. So as far as other products out there, I haven't really seen anything that's convincing yet. And I haven't gotten any data that's shown me otherwise. When you start talking about fire blankets, all they're going to do is protect the exposure. So protect the surrounding area. They're going to cover that fire. And when you're talking like a full EV blanket, that's just going to help contain everything. And it's still going to burn under there. The batteries are still going to go through that thermal runaway process. When you're talking about fire blankets for home use, for smaller devices like e-bikes and hoverboards, I really don't recommend them, because what I've seen a lot of times is you deploy these fire blanket. Number one, you've got to get close enough to put the fire blanket over it as a individual, and you're probably going to get hurt doing that. But what I've seen a lot of different security footage videos where people put that fire blanket over top, and the fire grows so fast that it kind of starts coming out of the sides of that fire blanket. So when it comes to these batteries and when they burn, you've got two things going on. You've got the thermal runaway event, which is giving off a lot of heat. It's giving off a lot of sparks, and you can contain that. But then you also have a bunch of flammable gas coming off. You've got carbon monoxide, which is flammable. You've got a lot of hydrogen, which is flammable. A lot of other hydrocarbons that are flammable. And even if you stop the fire, now you've got all this flammable gas coming out, and it's a significant quantity. And if the space is small enough, you could have that explosion, that deflagration, and cause some major issues. Just jumping back to the sand, I've seen sand, I've seen water in manufacturing facilities, and that's, again, not going to stop the thermal runaway. But what that will do is at least contain it, so you're not going to have that fire jumping into other areas and catching other things on fire.
So in your mind, obviously with the two vehicles, we kind of talked about this a little bit offline beforehand, the EV space is a lot newer, so you don't see as many current. I think, you mentioned with the gas vehicles, you see it in older vehicles, which, obviously I concur with it. I don't think a lot of new vehicles just spontaneously combust and catch fire. Same thing with EVs. You're not seeing them just randomly catch fire unless it's an isolated event where I think you see electrical shorts or stuff like that. What do you see as far as the data between EVs and gas-powered vehicles as far as fire risk and safety overall?
Yeah, unfortunately, that data doesn't really exist today. When I go to a vehicle fire, or when I go to any fire incident, when I get back to the firehouse, the first thing I have to do is do a fire report. And that goes into the NFIRS system, which is the National Fire Incident Reporting System. And that system was designed back in the 70s. It doesn't do a really good job of capturing all the data we need. And we don't have a really good way of isolating the cause of that fire. When you're talking about an electric vehicle, was it just a cabin fire where somebody dropped something hot inside the vehicle and caught the interior on fire? Was the vehicle charging and the battery spontaneously combusted? Was it sitting in a garage and you had a garage fire for another reason, and that caught the EV on fire? We're not really tracking that. But the other side of it, which is really frustrating in my mind, is when you look at the VIN number for these vehicles, they don't call out the propulsion type. So when you try to analyze the data that's out there, it's very difficult to gather just EV fires versus combustion versus plug-in hybrids versus hybrids. We don't have a good way of capturing that data and analyzing it. One thing that's frustrating for me, aside from all that, is when you look at media reports, or every time there's an EV fire and there's a news article about it, they pull up a statistic from what they call the NTSB and say there's only, EV fires are very rare. It's 25 out of every 100,000 that catch on fire. But unfortunately, I've dug into the data on that, and I tried to understand where that came from. And it turns out that has nothing to do, the data the way they came up with that data had nothing to do with fires at all. It was fatal crash data from the NTSB from a period of 2013 to 2017. And to get their 100,000 vehicle mark, they use sales data, not all vehicles on the road at the time, but sales data from 2018, just a single year. So the number that's reported all the time doesn't mean anything. And that comes originally from an insurance broker, Auto Insurance EZ. I've actually done 2 videos on that. Number one, a deep dive into why that data is not accurate, but another deep dive onto why we don't have accurate data, looking at data from the NTSB, the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration, the NFPA, which is the National Fire Protection Association. So there's a lot of different agencies out there, but unfortunately, we just don't have data in this area.
I think that was the thing that surprised me most, was to look at that and to know that that data predates the Model Y, for example, which is the best selling EV in the world, including in the United States. And to say nothing about all the subsequent vehicles that have come, like our Ford Lightnings, the Mach-E, all of the stuff that's out there that has been growing for years now. That data is so old, and to learn that there's not a way to capture that was really shocking to me. How does that get changed? Because it's a dilemma where I believe anecdotally that it's less frequent. Being out here in California where I'm surrounded by EVs, I believe it, but I'm a data-driven guy. Like I want the data. And one of the things that makes me crazy is when I realize something like this, it's like a gut punch, because the point of doing podcasts like we're doing is to be not sensationalistic and to on either side. Like all of us like to be transparent about the things in our vehicles that have been struggles, or the things that are shortfalls or limits, and then we like to really champion the areas that they excel and do an incredible job. And so when I take and find myself repeating information that I don't realize is out of date and incomplete, I hate that about myself, because it makes some of the other things I've said less credible. If I keep regurgitating the same data that I just had assumed had been updated throughout the years and proven itself out. And so when you first kind of mentioned it, I was like, man, I searched 3 different areas, and like, that can't be true. That can't be true. And it is. And that's nuts to me that there isn't a capture method. When you talk about the system that the firefighters use, which would seem to be a great one, a great place to start, because then you're capturing home instances, vehicle fires, accidents, not just deaths. There's such a wide range of things that fire departments report to, including some of those toys that we've talked about. I can remember those hoverboards being the big thing, right? And a bunch of them were catching on fire during the holiday. But again, you need stats, because those things sold millions and millions and millions. So what percentage of those millions caught on fire? Of course, they were sensationalized, put around the world. I guess let's start with this. The system that you mentioned, is that pretty much universal to 90+% of fire departments around the U.S.? Does it go worldwide? Like, what's the scope of that system, and how does it get updated? Would the government have to update that? Are there fire unions that would have to update that? Like, who would update that? Because that seems like the place to start.
Yeah, so that system is through the U.S. Fire Administration, and it is actually, believe it or not, in the process of being updated right now. So they're getting ready to launch a new system called NERIS. I believe that's the National Incident Reporting System, if I remember correct. I might have the name off right now, but that should go live in 2026. It's live right now, and they're trying to onboard a certain number of fire departments. Now, it is only for the U.S., and when you start talking about the scope of fire departments using it, it's not 100% of fire departments. Even the old system wasn't 100% of fire departments in the U.S. I want to say we're right around 85%, if I remember correctly. But the reason why the majority of fire departments do use it is because a lot of federal funds, grant funding, and a lot of state funding requires that you use this system in order to get your funding. But on the plus side, yes, we are updating it. UL, I believe it's UL Fire Safety Research Institute is the group in charge of developing the system. They've ended their beta testing phase, and like I said, they're onboarding. I want to say the number was like 25,000 fire departments was the goal this year, and then next year they want to switch. The goal is to switch everybody over.
So one of the things is, I mean, obviously, the U.S. EV market's relatively new, so we don't have a lot of data on pretty much any points across the base. I mean, Jesse and I deploy charging stations, and it's very difficult to get reliable data for what utilization of a charging station would look like because it's so new. EVs are growing year over year. It's such a newer market. My question is, have you seen data coming from other places, specifically? China, for instance, is a huge level of EV adoption now. They're ramping it up a lot more recently. Have you seen any data coming out of other places like Europe and China where the EV adoption is further along for fire data from them, or have you looked strictly at US-based data?
I've looked at other organizations out there. I haven't found anything that to me is really good data or newer data. Some countries, I believe Sweden, Norway, again, they've put out data, but when you look at the number of just their population, the size of their country, you're talking about a country the size of Rhode Island, and it's hard to say. It's hard to draw from that and say that's going to apply to the U.S. There's an organization out there, EV FireSafe. I was drawing a blank on a name right now. So EV FireSafe is an Australian-based company, and what they do is they scour the web for fire events in the media, and they take those events, they bring them into their database, and they look at the causes of those fires. They do a really good job, but unfortunately, because they're only grabbing, they're only scraping the media. It's a challenge to say that's real accurate data because they're not capturing everything. And there's a lot of stuff that doesn't even make the media. I know of several fires that have happened around us locally that it's never going to make any type of local media, let alone national news. So it's really a struggle right now to gather that information.
Yeah, and I mean, I've seen some data coming out of some, like China, for instance, that have the data skewing to the favor of the EV, but also the question becomes, how do you factor in the relevance of the age of the vehicle? With
Right.
EVs being a newer technology, you don't see vehicles that are more than 15 years old. In the gas industry, you have all these 1980 something falling apart jalopies on the road, and those are
Sure.
the ones usually. You probably know this better than I do, but I've seen 2 or 3 cars on fire, and they're not 2020, Altimas. They're the 1990 Toyota that's been on the roads a little too long and is falling apart to the point that you see those type of issues come into play. So how do you factor in the newness of the vehicle to that? And then the second part of that question is, I think a lot of the data indicates that most of the times when the fire occurs outside of a wreck, it's most of the time in relation to charging. Is that what you've seen, or have you seen more isolated incidents?
Yeah, when you're talking about the age of the vehicle, you're absolutely right. The vehicles we respond to for vehicle fires, they're absolutely the older vehicles, 15, 20 years old, duct tape, zip ties, poorly maintained. When you start looking at EVs, and this is just something that an observation I've made, we don't have good data on this, unfortunately, but a lot of the EV fires I've seen are newer vehicles. They're a year old, they're 2 years old. Heck, we've had a couple of them in Dearborn, Michigan. We had one Ford Lightning drive right off the assembly line and burst into flames in the parking lot. Rivian had one not too long ago that took out. It was a brand new vehicle off the assembly line, getting ready to or waiting to be loaded on trains. It caused a fire that burned like 62 different vehicles, all brand new vehicles. So what I'm seeing is it seems like EVs, when they do catch on fire, they're newer vehicles. And a lot of the times, I don't know that charging really plays a role. I don't have enough data to say one way or another. To me, it makes sense that when you're charging that vehicle, you're stressing those batteries more, you're putting more heat into those batteries, and it would make sense that would be a reason why they would catch on fire. But we don't have solid data in that area, unfortunately.
I think the other aspect to charging an EV, especially at home, and I've seen pictures of these fires or things that could have been fires, are the charging aspects where they're using outlet plugs.
Yes.
Common plug is the NEMA 1450. Tom Malogny also owns a Ford Lightning, and Rivian and a bunch. He's owned EVs forever. and he's done a whole series where he's gone out and replaced outlets and talked and done a series of videos on these plugs and making sure you're using the Hubble or a similar, I say industrial, but it gets scary because there are a number of plugs out there that mark themselves as industrial or heavy duty, and they're for the purposes of, say, a welder or something. They're still not robust enough for the 6 to 10 to 12 hour continuous high amp draw. And there might be heavy duty for an oven or heavy, in an industrial kitchen, or heavy duty in an industrial welder, or a shop situation for mechanical reasons, but not for charging an EV. Have you seen any data or in the fire departments, do you guys talk about that when you're coming up to a home and those home charging instances? Are you seeing those come up more than you used to as EVs become more common with house fires?
It's definitely a major point of discussion right now. We're seeing a lot of what you were talking about, fires in the outlet. Or the other thing is, you look at home wiring, even your 110 chargers, your level 1 chargers, you're plugging into a regular outlet. Some of these homes, number one, you think about a house where you go to plug in your power brick and it just falls out of the wall because those outlets are worn and they're old. That's not going to play very well when you start talking about an EV charger that's up in that 8, 10, 15 amps for a long period of time. But then you look at the wiring in the walls. Recently here, I believe it was Brighton, Michigan, there was a home that had wiring in the wall. I believe it was aluminum wiring in the wall that caused a fire inside the wall itself because that wire wasn't able to shed its heat and caught the building materials on fire. We have areas where people are plugging their cars in with extension cords, multiple extension cords, and causing fires in the extension cord. So there's a lot of issues on the charging side. Personally, when you look at the level 2 chargers, I don't think that I think we need to get away from the plug-in style. I think we need to move only into hardwired chargers, because a lot of these outlets really aren't designed to be plugged and unplugged all that many times. And you mentioned like the dryer fire. I've seen recently a picture of somebody that ran their charging cable through their dryer vent to get into their home so they could plug it into where their dryer was plugged in order to charge their vehicle. So you get people that do things like that and just don't understand the hazard they're creating.
One of the things that blows my mind the most is, the EV space is, has everybody doing something with, all these different companies. And we've seen, influencers like, Brandon Flash doing reviews of all these adapters and things are just horribly constructed, terrible, unsafe for the user, for shock hazard, but heat transfer. I mean, you're dealing with lots of energy being moved from A to B and not enough consideration for the middle ground of the safety of the user for shock because of how much energy. People don't realize how much energy is flowing through your hand when you're plugging in a DCFC level 3 fast charger. It's a lot of power. But then secondarily, like you're saying, I'm just going to plug it up to my house. You don't realize the implications of the risk that you're putting yourself in by overstraining a system or whatever. You're not taking those things into consideration before just plugging it in. And there needs to be a lot more consideration because of not only the electrical safety, but also the personal safety with some of these different technologies that are not certified, that are all over the place, providing a standard that's going to keep the electrical systems intact and also the people safe for the experience of charging a vehicle at high speeds.
Yeah, and I think they got to get better at that, because as EVs become more common and get to be a lot transitioning, and I think it's starting to, from the early adopters and the technological type of folks, it gets to be more common to where your neighbor next door who doesn't know the first thing about electricity, and I say that, but even myself, when I got the Lightning, my plan was to hook it up originally with the mobile charger to my dryer plug, and I didn't realize that I couldn't adjust the amperage on the truck. I didn't realize that a 30 amp outlet didn't mean that I couldn't draw 30 amps from it, right? That you have to be 80 or 90% of that for continuous draw. And if I don't know that, and I discovered it because of the forums and because of the videos like Tom Malogny. And when I first got my charger, then, it put in as a 1450, a plug-in, my mobile charger basically burnt out. And after that, I was like, well, I don't want to have this thing hardwired, because then it's going to, if the next one burns out, that's going to be a pain in the ass. I want to be able to just swap it out with something from Amazon if I need to. And then, so that was my initial thing. And then I go and I start, the more I read and the more I see in the forums and the more videos I see, I'm like, oh crap, I probably don't have the right outlet. I probably am buying these cheap, other adapters and things from Amazon. These are all bad ideas. And sure enough, I go through and I finally switch it out to a Hubble. I got an electrician out that knew more than my first one did. My first one was just a normal electrician and threw it in there with a Leviton Home Depot thing. And if I'm doing that, and thank God I was on the forums and watching the videos and actively trying to learn and part of the community, but as a new EV owner, I didn't know any of this stuff. And I took the time to learn about it, but a ton of people never will. And
a lot of people don't understand electricity, and most stuff we plug into our outlets, even if it's a high draw application or a larger device, we'll say like a vacuum cleaner, right? You plug it in, you turn it on, you get a really big spike of current, but it drops way down and it stays pretty low. Your EVs, it goes up and it stays up the entire time for hours. And that is just not good for a lot of electrical systems. They're not designed for that.
That's the challenge. Is that I don't want to feed into the fear. I don't want to feed into the hyperbole, but it really is stunning to me that we don't have good systems to capture the data, and that the data that we do have is so out of date at a time when these things are exploding, whether it's battery backup, whether it's EVs in general. All these things are becoming more common, and I want them to continue. And the last thing I want is for that to be unsafe for families, because it's bad for everybody involved if suddenly it gets that reputation and it starts to proliferate out there in public and electricians don't know. Aluminum wires is incredibly common out here in California because it's a cost-saving measure. And aluminum is a horrible idea for EV chargers. The whole what gauge needs to be used, all that stuff, the way it corrodes over time, all of those things are problematic if you're talking about the choice of copper and aluminum. And there's a lot of places where we see new construction going up, and it's so costly out here that aluminum has become the wire of choice. And yeah, those types of regulations need to be upgraded. It needs to be copper. There needs to be, the right gauge. It needs to be the right breaker. All these things have got to be better. And it's shocking to learn that it's not, I guess. And it's disappointing. So I hope this stuff, I'm not one for regulation, man. I hate things that slow down progress. I hate for things that add layers of complication to what's already a cost. You guys, Josh and Jesse, know all the environmental and regulatory and permitting and surveys and studies and bureaucracy, and then it gets paused and the form gets changed and you're back to submitting again, and funding on and off. The last thing we need is more complications, but we do need clarity and we do need data, because you can't make good decisions without accurate, relevant data. And I feel like I'm shocked, Jesse, I'll use the shocked pun intended, to learn that it's not there. I'm kind of annoyed that it's not there.
Well, and it all comes down to life. What is a life worth? And if these regulations allow for things to be safer, we have a lot of experience now, more from Patrick's side, to show people that have been put in a situation where that wiring wasn't good, or there wasn't a button that you could press to turn everything off. So it's about knowing the problem and then fixing that problem moving forward. To your part, Chris, even if you save money by using aluminum, if you're an EV owner, you're not going to do that for at least that. It might work for everything else, but if you have to have that copper line and that higher gauge just for an EV charger, that's what you go with. It's all about taking technology and making something that's better. So here locally, I'm trying to talk to our power supplier about replacing a meter with one that has a built-in management system for EVs that's directly with the meter. That way they control it. It's on their side. It's already been tested. Those are types of things that it doesn't you can have a set price for an EV person to come in and buy a house. And now where the meter is at is where you need to hook up for. That's not the best location for a lot of people, but that's another option. So when you're building a new house, you might run aluminum in everything except for where your vehicle is. And a lot of people don't know that. So it's the educational side of this, that even if it's not code, you do it anyway because you know what's going to be better. For our site that we're doing in Kentucky, you know, we're going to work with the teams that's there and try to build it to show an example, not to be able to be the cheapest price for that type of system. So it's all about trying to get the right system, not the cheapest.
Yeah, and that's a lot of the reason why I started the YouTube channel in the beginning, was just to get that education out there and let people know what was happening in this world. I understand fully that most people never experience a vehicle fire. It doesn't matter if you own an EV or a combustion engine vehicle. Just like most people never have a house fire at their home. But in your homes, I hope everybody's got fire extinguishers, and I hope you've got fire alarms, that you've got batteries or they're hardwired and they're working properly. Even though you never expect to have a fire, you at least put those safety precautions in place. When it comes to EVs and a lot of stuff around batteries, we don't know what safety precautions we need. And the way you learn is you learn through failure. You learn through other people's failures. And that's a lot of the reason why I get that information out there. It's interesting because it really ties back to my experience as an R&D engineer. In research and development, my goal was to fail early. Try something, see what happens. If it fails, great. I'm going to learn from something. It's going to be a new iteration, and I'm going to try and test it again. It kind of really goes back to what I'm doing now with this EV stuff and the batteries and the videos. You know, look at those failures. Why are they happening? What can we learn from them, and how can we make things better?
So in your mind, you know, if you had just based on your experience in the matter, what would you feel like is a few things that are important for every EV owner to have in mind? Like, just like we just talked about with houses, with, you know, fire alarms and extinguishers, like having a plan in place as an EV driver, what would be the advice that you'd provide to somebody buying an EV to put themselves in a position where they are safe?
The biggest thing is, if you're charging at home, make sure that you're installing it properly. You've got not only a qualified electrician, but one that understands EV chargers. Again, I really think the option to hardwire your charger is critical, and not use extension cords. So a lot of it goes around just charging safety and making sure you're doing everything electrically right. If you're parking in a garage, and I say this for everybody, make sure your garage is clean and it's not like a hoarding situation where you've got boxes piled floor to ceiling. You would not believe how many times we run into garages like that. So just really simple things. I would love to see some type of notification on the outside of a garage door that lets the fire department know there's an EV in there, only because we've seen a handful of vapor cloud explosions too now that have taken garage doors and thrown them into the driveway about 30 feet. So that's another area where and not just EVs, battery energy storage systems as well, if they're inside of a garage. I'd love to see some type of notification so the fire department knows when they're getting on scene.
Yeah, maybe something on the electrical panel. I know with my solar out here in California and with my battery backup, I have big red signs that are required to be posted on the breaker box outside the main box. And that's so at least they know that the solar is there and the battery backup is there. But that's maybe another place where if you have an EV, that would be a good place for that to exist.
Yeah, I'd like the garage door better, because most times, and especially if they're not aware of the hazard, when the fire department rolls up and they see smoke coming out of a garage, the first thing they're going to do is take a big K12 saw with a blade about this big around, and they're going to make a triangle cut right in that door. And because you've got that flammable gas, guess what's going to happen with those sparks? You know, good chance you're going to have a little bit of an explosion.
I was going to ask you, how do you open that garage door? Do you take a big old hook and like stab into it and yank it open? No, you take a big old saw and you cut through it, huh?
Yep.
Yeah.
Interesting. Well, as we kind of wrap up, obviously wanted to encourage everybody that's listening to go follow StacheD Training on YouTube and any other relevant platform. It's been very insightful to have some of your knowledge and experience. Give us kind of your summary thought for the EV space as it exists and as it's progressing. What are your what are your greatest encouragements in the space, like with any technology that's improving for safety, and what are your largest concerns?
Yeah, as far as encouragements, I think that the industry is not going anywhere. There's a lot of people that think with the new administration it's just going to die. There's always going to be electric vehicles on the road. There's always going to be people interested in that type of technology. Personally, I think we're going to see a lot more of the plug-in hybrids coming out on the roads in the future. I think that space is going to grow significantly. There's a lot of people that like that. And as far as fire departments are concerned, they're going to see most of these vehicles in your urban areas. You start getting out into the rural areas, and it doesn't make as much sense to own an electric vehicle because of the distance you're traveling. But ultimately, when it comes to the fire risk, just like I said before, most people, they're never going to experience a fire. But on the flip side, with the fire departments, we see all of those failures. I think I went on, or our department went on like 35 or 40 vehicle fires last year alone. So just to kind of put things in perspective, the fire departments are definitely going to see them. Now, when it comes to EVs, my biggest concern and the biggest risk that I'm seeing is, like I mentioned before, these vehicles don't like to be mechanically damaged. And when it comes to the design criteria and the specifications around electric vehicles, a lot of the design is around a 35 to 45 mile an hour crash, whether it's front, rear, or side pole impact. When you get those high impact crashes at 50, 60, 70 miles an hour, that's where I have a lot of fear that those cars are going to catch on fire. Those batteries are going to go into thermal runaway almost instantaneously. And it's not going to allow people a chance to get out. And the fire department's not going to have that chance to actually cut people out of those cars. So it's a big change for us on the vehicle electrification side. So that's kind of where I'm at.
So they ought to be made like the Cybertruck, which are like, the rolling tanks that, have a little bit more resilience against wrecks. But I've seen those things get absolutely tore up now that they've been out for a year. But I think in any situation, once the crash is bad enough, then it's one of those things that there's lots of implications. Just as a question of how to make it the most safe. And that's a good question. I mean, with the one plus to an EV is it's very limited parts. You got your battery and your motors, and it's very limited as far as the front end doesn't usually have a lot of infrastructure and stuff with the engine and all the different moving parts associated with that. However, also you have to find a way to protect that battery in the best way possible, because like you're saying, it doesn't want to be compromised, which would make complete sense. But, center vehicle on the floor is about the best you can do, but how do you keep that as safe as possible and as reinforced with the surroundings, where if you get in a wreck, that it protects that the best way possible. Obviously, we got to find ways to be more, to have more safety over time with these things and have new standards. But I think the biggest takeaway is we have to find a way to get reporting to where we can understand the data of the newness of the vehicle, the type of vehicle, the type of fire, but also, we know that EV fires are going to be the more severe of the two, but how often do they happen? What are the causes that are being identified for that, to find ways to avoid that? Is it mostly charging, or is it spontaneous, or is it heat related when you're driving at high speeds for a long time and the battery warms up? Like, what is causing these things to take place, that we can find ways to better protect and eliminate those. In any space, you're trying to find ways to make it more safe. But obviously, that's something that needs to have more data done.
And always have a plan. A lot of people don't have a way to bust the glass in their vehicle, and a lot of these electric vehicles have automatic door locks that are electric. And if you get that C panel or that B and A panel compromised, and it locks your door in, a lot of people don't have the ability to bust that glass to be able to pull out. So always have a plan, whether it's at home, whether it's in your car. Always have a way.
So I want to tack onto the glass side of it. your window punch isn't going to work on a lot of modern vehicles. And that's not limited to electric vehicles, because in the past they had tempered glass where you use that punch, it shatters everything. It's very easy to get out of. Now, a lot of these side windows, the side glass, it's laminated. So it's very challenging. The same glass they use in the windshield, essentially.
Okay.
Yeah, with the things like the updated Model Y, the updated Model 3, those are double pane, sound deadening glass. The Cybertruck, of course, unless you have a big steel ball that your engineer throws at it, those are resilient things. And I think we see stories where people buy the Teslas and they don't take the time to learn where the emergency manual latch is, for example. And if you've got an electric vehicle, know where that latch is. Find a way to get out of those scenarios. Think about it before the emergency happens, because when that emergency happens isn't the time to try to figure out where your emergency pull is to get that door open or to bust that window through.
And if you have an EV fire that's battery related, don't try to put it out yourself.
Get away.
Call the fire department. If it's like you something set on fire in your cabin, then try to put that out maybe. But I wouldn't dare attempt to self extinguish a fire out of that's an EV fire. Even a gas vehicle is dangerous, but I think potentially you could use a fire extinguisher and have some success with that. But don't make that attempt with an EV.
Yeah, the batteries have some nasty. All smoke is bad. You don't want to be breathing in any smoke, but batteries have some extra stuff in there that's especially toxic that can really do some lifelong damage.
So, yeah.
Do you guys have to use, really quick before we wrap up, do you have special respirators and gear that you have to use in those fires, or is it the same gear that you would use in a normal vehicle fire?
Yeah, it's the same gear we'd use in a normal vehicle fire. So our SCBA is self-contained breathing apparatus. It's a mask that seals to our entire face, and it's just regular air.
Interesting. Well, any final thoughts that you want to share? Give a plug for your website and your channel, and we will wrap it up.
Yeah, if you want to learn more, visit www.StacheDtraining.com, StacheD Training.com, or you can find me on YouTube at StacheD Training.
Perfect. Well, thank you so much, Patrick, for your time today. Obviously, the insight is something we usually talk about the vehicles and the different things, but going into some of the safety stuff is something we've not actually touched on before. So it's always insightful to have professionals in the space talking about it. And if you have more questions, feel free to comment below. Let us know your thoughts. What have you experienced, whether you are an ICE or a EV driver? What are your thoughts? Share that. We'll happily comment back. And if there's enough, we can maybe have a follow-up discussion in the near future with Patrick to kind of address any possible topics there. But thank you so much, Patrick, for joining us today. Like and subscribe to our channel, StacheD Training, and Bow Family EV. And we will be back next week for more EV news and updates.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thanks for tuning in to Turn Down for What. Make sure you're subscribed with your notifications on to tune in to more EV news and updates. See you next time.